Hi, it's Kirby Sommers, and today is August 12th, 2025. While most people have been, let's say, discussing the so-called JE case, and as it pertains to, let's say, Bill Clinton, Donald Trump, and many other people, what they fail to bring up is that Bill Clinton actually had a pretty significant role in covering up and pushing back on what we know as the Franklin cover-up, let's say. So I don't think I need to remind you guys that A, from my research, it's very clear to me that these are all part of the same ongoing operation that began even long before the Franklin case, which we know included Boys Town in Omaha, Nebraska. And we know includes familiar names such as Paul Bonacci, Troy Bonner, who regrettably lost his life, and Alicia Owen and other people. However, I don't see anywhere that anybody has connected something that Bill Clinton did in order to kind of keep the lid on this case. What I want to remind some of you of is that Rusty Nelson, who was the photographer for Lawrence King, who, by the way, I have connected to Gerald Ford, and they're related. And I was just a little surprised that people were like, well, and I took down the podcast that I uploaded to YouTube because I was completely like my mind was blown when I'm like reading comments saying, "Well, isn't Larry King black and Gerald Ford white?" And I'm thinking, seriously, does nobody remember Jefferson, the President Jefferson, who R-worded his teen slave and had children with her? And does no one really know about the history of blacks in America? So that blew me away. And you know what? I just could not deal with information from people but although I have to say that the people who left comments like that, I had not recognized their handle. So it's not those of you who are regular to my channel or regular to my work. These were like from random people that I'd never seen or heard from before. So it's very likely that maybe they just wrote stuff like that to deter others from looking deeper into the connections that I discovered, that I present in my book, Gerald Ford MK Ultra, which by the way is available only on my website right now. But I want to get back to Bill Clinton and the Franklin case. So there is an FBI agent who happens to be black, by the way. I mean, I don't know why people still have to color code everything, but I guess we still have to do that. Okay. Well, his name is Roshan. And this guy Roshan, his first name is Donald, and he I'm gonna have to say the word black because I guess people need to know who's black and who's white for reasons unknown to me. But in any event, he was a black FBI agent in Omaha, and he started to find links between Larry King, Boys Town, and even some of the FBI agents that he was working with as having inappropriate relationships with the children. Okay. And he got basically a lot of death threats during the time that he was in there in order to get him to quit. Now I'm gonna and this was being done clearly uh, for the ongoing cover up that continues to present day. So I'm gonna just share uh, what he did. So in 1990 there was an article that came out in the New York Times about how this quote black FBI agent looks back on years of harassment. And I'm just going to read this to you, or as much of it as I can. In the end, Donald Roshan was still deprived of what had once been his life's dream to finish out his career as an agent of the FBI. Yet, in the aftermath of his landmark settlement, and by the way, we're going to come back to that settlement in a minute because that's what connects Bill Clinton to the cover up of the Franklin case, which I'm sorry, but I don't find it being talked about by either the two books that were written or the film that was called a documentary that we can find on YouTube. All right. So he says that he's proud to have persevered in his often nightmarish 7-year legal struggle and is relieved that it's finally over. He said there is an internal war within the FBI over racism. So what he did was he pushed back using race as the basis for his lawsuit against the FBI, which ultimately he won. But I'll let you know what happened to the guy who helped him finally win this case. And he was like, at the time that the case was settled, he was 40 years old. He had joined the agency in 1981. And because of the settlement, then he decided he's going to retire. I mean, they put him through hell, is what they did. So that the settlement was expected to provide Mr. Roshan with payments, including a full pension, worth more than $1 million over his lifetime. And then his legal team was going to receive $500,000 in a separate payment. Civil rights lawyers say they believe it is the largest settlement of a discrimination case brought by an individual FBI employee. It's a complete victory. Mr. Roshan's chief lawyer, David Carey's, said, we wouldn't have settled for anything less. Here's the thing, had somebody very important not become part of this, they would have dragged him through the mud because the FBI has the deepest pockets, right? And we have at least heard about what's happening in the FBI as it pertains to the so-called one-off JE case, which is not a one-off at all, at least from my research, and I believe that now many of you have been able to wrap your minds around that. Um, the settlement appears to end years of charges and countercharges over internal discrimination in the Bureau, an agency charged with enforcement of the nation's civil rights laws. It comes 2 years after a federal judge in Texas found systematic discrimination within the Bureau against Hispanic employees. So anyway, um, they agreed to settle the case because, uh, according to this article, it feared that if it really was like a court trial, it would expose how white, and this is according to the article, FBI agents had made death threats against his family when Mr. Roshan worked in Chicago, and how bureau supervisors confronted with evidence of brutal racial harassment had tried to cover it up. Now, he also said that there are other Black agents and that they were just too intimidated by the Bureau to fight back. Um, I mean, what I want to do is I want to find and give me a second so there are a lot of things that were done to him to scare him, to intimidate him, and to make him just simply vanish. And all of this because he had uncovered information again, linking his fellow co-workers in Omaha, Nebraska to the Franklin situation, showing that they were involved having inappropriate blank with the children. Now, he was saying the physical strain of just being there was doing me in, meaning having to go to court over and over and over again. And that's what they do to you, by the way. And he had been on disability leave since like April of the year that this was finally settled. At work, I was nauseous and my stomach would get twisted into knots. I'd go home at night and collapse in pain. I would have nightmares about other agents trying to kill me, trying to push me off a cliff. And then what this also did was it broke up his marriage. And it became too much pressure for his wife. And even that, and that's actually what they do. They just want to destroy your foundation. So therefore, they destroy your family. And of course, your wife will leave you, your children will be gone too. And it's just, they just create a very toxic life for you. Um, then, I mean, he had married a woman who was white, and the she too would receive phone calls harassing her because of their quote interracial marriage. All right. So I do want to find other things because I had found, okay, so in one incident in Omaha, he returned to his desk to find that somebody had pasted an ape's head over a photograph of his son. Another time, a photograph of the bruised face of a black man was placed in his mail slot. When he formally complained about the incidents, he said that the harassment by white agents escalated, especially after he was transferred to Chicago in 1984. Now, as many of you know, the Franklin situation did not really rear its head until late 1980s. I believe it was 1989 when that very now infamous article came out showing that so-called the call boys visiting the White House article, but we know that it's Ronald Reagan's administration, and we know that George H.W. Bush, who has been a lifetime CIA asset agent and who then became the director, well, they were at the head of the country, let's say, at least the United States at that time. And then he also received unsigned death threats, letters sent to his house. And these were like death threats. Now, as a survivor, I have received death threats. I have also been at the receiving end of attempts to unalive me. And so when I read this, I suppose I read this through the lens of somebody who continues to be harassed to present day. But I look at this, and the only card that he had to play was to sue them because finally, uh, he, you know, uh, he sued them. Um, he sued them because eventually he was he was just faced with such pushback. Imagine going to work every day and not knowing what you're going to find. You're going to be in perpetual state of post-traumatic stress disorder. You're not going to be able to think logically. And so the federal suit charged that he was the butt of racial jokes and the target of death threats by fellow agents, sort of like in the mid 1980s. So in the mid 1980s, what else is happening? We have the explosion in the public eye of the Iran-Contra affair. Now, the Iran-Contra war, Ronald Reagan's war, right? And the public was ill-informed, not properly informed what it was all about, but we know historically how the CIA goes into other countries and takes over, and pretty much that's what they were doing during this period. That also included Israeli forces, right? Because the Israeli forces during the Iran-Contra war were the ones who did the arms trafficking. Now, many of the children who were, let's call, transportationed, I don't know what other word to use in order to be safe on this platform or any platform, did say, well, we know that our money and went to fund the Iran-Contra war, and that would be correct. So the only way that this guy knew how to sue was to, latch on to the racial harassment and the retaliation because he complained about being so-called harassed because of the race. Now, at the time that this was settled, William Sessions was head of the FBI. Now, he agreed to settle the case on the terms of trying to avoid the disruption to the FBI's operation and the drain on its resources. So this was costing the FBI. It's never been reported how much they wasted of taxpayer money to fight this case brought against them. Okay. But Sessions came in and said, he's going to settle it. He settled it. And I believe the actual amount was 1.5 million because it was too much of a drain on the FBI's financial resources. And then he believed that the trial would have really not really gone anywhere. Now, here is what happened. Bill Clinton fires William Sessions, who, by the way, is not related to Attorney General Jeff Sessions, okay? And so we have Bill Clinton firing him on July 19, 1993. Now, that's, I would say, a little over a year from the time that he became president. So then we know, if you study history, that Clinton was very much involved in the MENA operation. The MENA operation was also connected to Iran-Contra. So that Clinton, by firing Sessions, and how do we know, by the way? I mean, I think this is a good time to ask the questions that Clinton fired William Sessions over the case that really has its origins in Omaha, Nebraska, for the Franklin intense cover-up that continues to present day. Because he was asked, he's like, well, why were you fired? Uh, and he was like, I was a good FBI chief. And then like on C-SPAN and in the New York Times, uh, he said, well, for starters, I settled the Roshan case. And then he goes on to say, why did I settle the Roshan case? Because everything Mr. Roshan was saying would have been established in a court as true, which would have done tremendous damage to the FBI. Okay, that said, I am very curious to hear your feedback on this podcast, and I wish you all a good day. Till next time. Bye.